A drill press is one of the essential stationary power tools in the shop. I've often said that you can get by with 3 essential stationary power tools. That's a table saw, a router table, and a good drill press. Now, drill presses come in 2 basic models. There's a floor model with a tall post that extends down to a base that rests on the floor. And there's another model, a bench top model, like this one, where the post is shorter and the base rests on either a stand or on your bench. Now, some of these benchtop models are smaller, and that has to do with the motor on the back that's smaller. And typically you can actually get by with a smaller drill press because you don't need a lot of horsepower for woodworking. However, the key feature on all of these is the drill press table. Most of the time this is cast iron, and in many of the older models there's a trough around the outside edge that's for catching oil when you're doing metalworking. There's also X-shaped slots cut in the tabletop, and that's to attach jigs and fixtures, and particularly vices to hold metal pieces in place while you're drilling holes. All of this is great for metalworking, not so good for woodworking. The tabletop on most drill presses is too small a surface to support larger workpieces, and there's no good way to attach a fence. Well, we have a solution for all of that. Over the years, we've designed a number of drill press tables to add to your drill press. Now, this is basically a simple design, a base that's large enough to support larger woodworking pieces and a fence to position those pieces to drill the holes. Now, this can all start out as a pretty simple process, and that would be just adding a plywood base to the cast iron table on your drill press. Now, typically when we're using plywood in the shop, we'll use Baltic birch plywood. It's multi-ply and no voids. Now, the multi-ply means that this surface will be pretty flat and smooth. That's good for supporting all your workpieces. Now, there's one other advantage to having this surface, this backup, for drilling holes through workpieces. As you're drilling the hole, the bit breaks through on the bottom and it could splinter. But having this auxiliary surface here prevents that splintering on the bottom edge of your workpiece. The problem here is as you continue to drill holes, this surface gets all chewed up, particularly if you switch and you're using larger bits. The bit keeps drilling holes, backs it up, that's nice for the no splintering, but now you have a chewed up surface here, and you need a way now to protect or replace this surface without replacing your entire tabletop. So there's a way to do that. The solution to all this is to add another top on top of the plywood base. Now, typically we use 1/4-inch hardboard, and the way we've done it lately is to do this in 3 parts that creates a kind of a slick system. There are 2 outside parts, so they go on the outside of the plywood base. These 2 sections will be glued down. That leaves a center section for a removable insert. But how do you glue these 2 pieces down and then have a removable insert that stays in place? Well, you can see that we've beveled the inside edges of both of these outside pieces. Then we can slide our insert in place, and this piece has been beveled the reverse way, and the bevels hold this piece down, in effect creating a sliding dovetail joint. So the advantage of all of this is this inside piece can be slid into place, the bevels hold it flat and smooth so you create a nice smooth surface for your workpiece. But as you drill a number of holes and you start chewing out one area, you can just slide this piece out a little bit, create a nice new smooth surface, or you can take this piece out entirely, flip it around, slide in the other end, and have nice smooth surface to work with. Or if the whole piece gets all chewed up, you can replace the entire thing. So it's always good to cut extra of these as you're cutting this first one. The trick becomes, how do I glue these 2 pieces down and allow a nice space in between for the insert so it slides in there smoothly? Well, we'll do all of that over at the bench. So we've got our plywood base for our drill press table, and we have to add the 2 hardboard pieces on the outside part of this table. Now you'll notice a couple of things. First of all, these pieces are cut oversized, and there's a reason for that. If we cut them to exact size, when we glue them down, in this case with spray contact cement, we'd have to make sure that all these 3 edges are perfectly aligned along with the 2 inside edges. That's very difficult to do. So instead we cut them oversized. They overlap front and back and on the edges here. And then later we can come back and trim this all flush with a router and a flush trim bit. So now all we have to worry about is the 2 inside edges. Now how do we make sure that these 2 edges are exactly parallel and that we don't get any contact cement on this center section where that insert's going to go? Well, it turns out the trick is really pretty simple. We just use a spacer block. So we cut a spacer piece out of just a piece of scrap plywood. I know that these 2 edges are exactly parallel. It was cut over at the table saw. So now if I butt my beveled edges up against that, I know that they're exactly parallel. So now I can glue these pieces down. All I have to do is mark where these edges are. So I'll remove these 2 pieces. Now I'll mark these edges. Now there's one little issue. These marks actually indicate approximately where I have to cover up this inside section here for the insert with no contact cement, but it has to overlap just a bit. You can see that my beveled edge extends right up to the edge of the spacer, but I don't want any contact cement back here to the short edge. So I'm have to overlap a little bit, and I'll do that with some painter's tape, just taking the tape to cover up this inside section here where the insert will go. Now I want to go past the line. So over on this side, I'm right up on the line. I want to go over it by at least 1/4 of an inch on the front and back edge. So then I'll do that over on the other side here. And go over about 1/4 of an inch. And cover up this edge. And then just continue to cover up this inside section with some more painter's tape. So all of the center section here where the insert will go is all covered up, and I'll get all these good pieces out of the way. Now I can put contact cement over this entire surface of the plywood. And in this case I'm using spray contact cement. It's the easiest stuff in the world to use. So I'm going to start off of the workpiece and then just spray right across. And just continue down. So I've got a layer of contact cement all over the plywood base for the table. Now I have to do the same thing on the bottom side of the hardboard pieces. Make sure it's the bottom side. One other detail, I do not want any contact cement on that beveled edge where the insert is going to slide in. So I've covered it, overlapping a little bit with painter's tape once again. Now I can use this spray contact cement and put down a nice even coat. And I'll do that on both pieces. So I've got contact cement on the base and on the two hardboard pieces. Now I have to join those together. So I'll start by taking all this tape off of this center section here. Now to position these two outside hardboard pieces, I need to use my spacer again, and I'll put it right down on my pencil marks. And since I'm going to use this piece to position those pieces, I want to clamp it down. And I'll just add a clamp to the other end, and then we're ready to put the pieces in place. So with the spacer all clamped in place, now I've got the hardboard pieces on the outside edges, and they're ready to go down. All I have to do is take off this tape off the beveled edge, just peel it up. Now I can start to put this over here, and I'll position the beveled edge right up against that spacer, and with my fingers on the front and back edge, I'm making sure that this piece is centered over the plywood base, and I've got a little bit of overhang. Now, when this piece goes down, that's it. There's no second chance. So make sure your beveled edge is firmly up against the spacer, and just drop it down on there. And now I drop the hardboard piece down, and it's all overlapping. There, good. Now I can do the same thing on the other side. Okay, the hardboard pieces are down, contact cement directly to the plywood base. I'm just using a J roller here to get this all smoothed out, make sure it's all firmly down there, and it is. Now I can remove this center spacer piece, and then I'll come back and trim my insert to size to fit inside this beveled opening here for the insert. So I just have to cut the insert, the beveled edges on both edges, down to size so that this insert fits nice and smoothly in between those other two pieces. So that's pretty slick. Now you may have to go back and forth to the table saw a few times to get this to fit nicely in here. And I trimmed off the front and back edges so this is all flush. The reason for that is I need this insert in place because the last step is to use a trim router, something like this is a small trim router, with a flush trim bit. Now this has a bearing on the end and then a straight bit effectively. And the bearing rides against the plywood piece, and then the straight bit will trim the outside edges of the hardboard. So I'll bring it down like this, where the trim router sits on the hardboard. It'll trim along here, and as I get to this center section, I need support, a surface, for the base of the router to continue on across here. So now I'm all set up to make that trim cut, and I'll make it. Turn the router on, move the bearing so it's up against the plywood edge, then trim the hardboard edge so it's flush with the plywood, moving counterclockwise around the table. So here we have it, our extra large drill press table, able to support larger pieces for woodworking projects, with a center section that's both movable and replaceable, and it's all ready to mount to our drill press.